If someone had told me I'd flirt with the janitor in passing, teasing him about marriage, I would have brushed it off as harmless fun. The elevator doors clanged shut with a weary shudder, sealing in the cocktail of bleach, dust, and a whisper of citrus. Maren was soaked to the skin, chilled, and seething. Her heels snapped against the tile as she jabbed the button for the top floor twice. As if extra pressure might bully the day into cooperating. It wouldn't. Today had gone off the rails before coffee. Her assistant called in sick. The board meeting was moved without looping her in. Then, just to crown it, her car died in the rain. None of it mattered now. One objective: reach the top floor, grab the hard drive she left in her office, and vanish before anyone caught the CEO of Caldwell Tech dripping like a stray cat. The cab lurched and stopped. The lights fluttered. Maren's stomach pitched. No, 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 she muttered. You have got to be kidding me. She punched the emergency button. Nothing. Then the speaker above crackled to life, a strained voice bleeding through. Looks like a quick power blip. Just hang tight. We've got someone on it. She exhaled a ragged groan and pressed her back to the cold mirror, damp hair sticking to her cheeks as the elevator hummed uselessly around her. She had a dinner reservation in an hour. Not that she cared about the food. She had a proposal to deliver, and it wasn't going to write itself. She glanced at the time. 6:38 p.m. Perfect, she muttered. A clang echoed above. Then came the faint sound of footsteps. Someone was on top of the elevator. Hey, Maren shouted. Is someone there? Don't panic. A woman's voice replied, muffled but calm. I'm here to get you out. Who are you? Janitor, the voice said. You okay in there? Do I sound okay? You sound pissed, the woman replied dryly. A pause. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more and let me know in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. Then a soft laugh. It's kind of hot. Maren blinked. Excuse me. Nothing, the janitor said quickly. More sounds, a tool clinking, a hiss of wires. You've got 5 minutes of patience in you. Maren swallowed. The voice, it was deep, smooth, with an accent she couldn't place. Confident, disarming. Fine. 5 minutes. A beat passed. What's your name? Sable. You work here? Technically, night shift. I fix things. Clean what rich people break. Maren rolled her eyes. Charming. And you? Sable asked. What do you do? Maren hesitated. She didn't want to explain herself. Not now. Office drone. She lied. Late hours figures. You sound tired. That hit harder than expected. Maren looked at her reflection in the elevator mirror. Mascara smeared. Hair wet. Jaw clenched. I'm fine. Sure. A soft hum. Then a crack. A panel on the elevator ceiling slid open, and a hand reached down. Strong, gloved, steady. I've got you. Maren hesitated. Took the hand. Sable's grip was warm. Sure. She pulled Maren up like it was nothing, lifting her through the hatch into the narrow, dark space above. For a moment, their faces were inches apart. Sable's eyes were dark, serious, searching. Her face was smudged with grease, and her dark hair was tucked beneath a cap. She wasn't what Maren expected. Too young, too sharp, too magnetic. You're heavier than you look, Sable teased. Maren narrowed her eyes. You're rudder than I expected. Flirting's not a crime. Sable grinned, then nodded toward the hatch leading to the service stairwell. Come on, I'll get you out of here. They climbed through a maze of dim corridors and metal ladders until they finally emerged in a service hall on the 34th floor. Sable pushed open a heavy door, and suddenly Maren was in the corridor that led to her own office. Here, Sable handed her a towel. Where had she even gotten it? Dry off. Thanks, Maren muttered, taking it. Sable tilted her head. You don't seem like an office drone. You don't seem like just a janitor. Maren shot back. Touche. They stood there, silence stretching between them like a taut wire. Marin didn't know why she said what she said next. Maybe it was the way Sable looked at her, like she wasn't just another suit. Maybe it was the fact that Sable had gotten her out, no questions asked. Or maybe Marin was just tired of pretending. If we meet again, Marin said, I'll marry you. Sable blinked, then smiled, bold. I mean it. Sable took a slow step backward, eyes never leaving hers. Then I'll see you round. Office drone. Marin watched her disappear into the stairwell, towel in hand, her heart thudding with something dangerously close to longing. What she didn't know, what she could know, was that Sable wasn't a janitor. Sable was the majority shareholder of Caldwell Decoration, the real power behind the company. And she just met the CEO without either of them knowing the truth. The week passed in a blur of deadlines, hollow meetings, and sleepless nights. Marin buried herself in work as always. That night in the elevator became a memory she couldn't categorize, a glitch in the matrix. A fever dream soaked in rain and flotation. Sable. The name echoed in the back of her mind like a song she couldn't shake. She had Googled her once. Nothing. No employee file. No maintenance crew listing. No trace of her and the company records. Marin wasn't used to not knowing things. It annoyed her. She was even more annoyed by how often her mind wandered back to that smirk, that voice, that hand pulling her up into the dark. A fantasy, nothing more. Until Wednesday. She was in the lobby headed toward the cafe in a rare moment of indulgence, when a woman brushed past her. Black baseball cap, same walk, same posture. Marin froze, but the woman didn't look back. She disappeared through the security doors like a ghost. Marin's chest tightened. It wasn't Sable. Couldn't be. Sable had said she worked nights. Still, she caught herself watching the stairwell every evening, foolishly hopeful. But Sable didn't come back. Not until Friday. Marin was in the boardroom when she heard her name. There's someone asking for you downstairs, her assistant whispered. She says she's a contractor. Marin didn't blink. Send her away. She said your exact words were, and I quote, if we meet again, I will marry you. The pen dropped from Marin's hand. Her heart stuttered. She's here wants 5 minutes. Says she'll fix your coffee machine for free. The board members watched her puzzled. Marin stood. Meeting adjourned. She found Sable in the executive break room, leaning casually against the marble counter like she belonged there. No uniform, no cap, black button down, sleeves rolled, tattoo barely visible on one forearm. That same look in her eyes, bold, amused, unreadable. Told you I'd see you round, Sable said, holding up a screwdriver. Your espresso machine's been making a weird sound. Figured I'd help. Marin crossed her arms, masking the pulse in her throat. You don't work here. Did I ever say I did? Sable countered. You said you were a janitor. I said I was fixing things, which I did. Marin exhaled slowly. What do you want? Sable tilted her head. Maybe I wanted to see if you meant it. What? The marriage offer. Marin blinked. That was sarcasm. Sable shrugged. Still, a girl can dream. Their eyes locked. For a moment, Marin forgot the room, forgot her title, forgot the weight of her carefully constructed world. Sable wasn't afraid of her. Sable was dangerous in all the right ways. You have 5 minutes, Marin said quietly. Sable smiled. That's all I need. They walked down the service hall past the elevator where it all began. Sable's hand brushed hers on purpose. Marin didn't pull away. You never told me what you actually do, Marin said. Sable looked up at the ceiling as if thinking. I buy things, fix companies, break a few, invest, travel. Sometimes I pretend to be a janitor to meet interesting women. You're lying, am I? Sable grinned. You Googled me, didn't you? Marin looked away. Sable stepped in front of her. I'm not asking for a date. I'm asking for coffee. No suits, no boardrooms, just you. Marin stared at her. She wanted to say no. She should say no. But instead, she whispered, tonight, Sable raised an eyebrow. Pick you up at 7. I'll text you the place. I'll guess. You won't. Sable leaned in, voice low. Try me. She was gone before Marin could reply. Just disappeared into the building like a mirage. Marin stood there, heart racing. What the hell was she doing? That night, Marin sat alone in a quiet wine bar downtown. She didn't send an address, didn't text, just waited, half believing Sable wouldn't show. But at 7:02 p.m., Sable slid into the seat across from her, eyes gleaming. Told you I'd find you. Marin didn't smile. Not yet. How did you know I'd be here? Because this place smells like you. That's the worst line I've ever heard. Sable leaned in, elbows on the table. Is it working? Marin's lips parted, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner. Unfortunately, they talked for hours about nothing, about everything. Sable never asked what Marin did, never asked about the company, never treated her like anything other than a woman drinking Merlot with chipped nails and a cynical smile. It felt terrifying. It felt real. By the end of the night, Sable walked her to her car. Neither moved. The silence swelled between them, full of charged possibility. So Sable murmured, still planning to marry me if we meet again. Marin's breath caught. Maybe. Sable leaned in, brushing a strand of wet hair from Marin's face. Then let's make sure we keep meeting. Marin didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every nerve still thrumming with the echo of Sable's voice, her laugh, the warmth of her hand brushing Marin's as they left the bar. It wasn't a date. She didn't do dates. Not with strangers. Not with women who showed up uninvited and slipped past security like shadows. But Sable wasn't a stranger anymore. She was something else. Something Marin didn't have a name for yet. And that was the problem. The next morning, Marin snapped at 2 board members, ignored 3 calls from the coup, and stared too long at the elevator every time it opened. She felt unmed, untethered, like someone had cracked open the world and let a little light in where it didn't belong. And yet, when Sable texted her that afternoon, want to break the rules tonight, Marin replied before she could stop herself. Where and when? Sable's reply came instantly. Anywhere. Midnight. Marin hesitated. Midnight meant risk. Her time, her control, her rules. And Sable wanted to pull her out of all of it. Good. Let her try. The rooftop of Caldwell Tech Building Rooftop wasn't on any employee's access list. It was technically off limits, under renovation, and completely deserted after dark. But when Marin stepped through the maintenance door at 11:59 p.m., Sable was already there, leaning against the railing, city lights casting gold into her eyes, wind tossing her hair like something from a film Marin would have called pretentious if she weren't living it. You're late, Sable said without looking. I'm exactly on time. Typical CEO, typical liar. Marin shot back. Sable turned to face her slow and deliberate. You didn't have to come. Marin stepped closer, pulse hammering. You make it really hard not to. Do I? Sable's voice was quiet now. She tilted her head, studying Marin like she was art. Valuable, rare, maybe just a little dangerous to touch. Why me? Sable asked. You could have anyone. No, I couldn't, Marin replied. People don't see me. They see the position, the power, the myth. You didn't flinch when I snapped at you. You didn't ask what I do. You didn't care. I care, Sable said. I just don't want to give you the power to run. Marin blinked. Sable stepped forward, their bodies inches apart. You're terrified of being wanted for who you are, not what you own. No, Marin whispered. I'm terrified that no one knows who I am at all. Sable's hand brushed hers, fingertips grazing like a question. Marin didn't pull away. Couldn't. What if I want to know? Sable asked. What if I already do? Marin looked away, but Sable gently took her chin, turning her face back. Her thumb stroked Marin's jaw, and Marin leaned into it before she could stop herself. Her walls were crumbling, and she was letting them fall. You shouldn't get close to me, Marin said. Try me. Marin reached for her, and Sable met her halfway. The kiss was slow, intense, searing. Marin tasted rain and fire, heard the blood rushing in her ears louder than the wind above the city. Sable kissed her like she already knew her secrets and didn't care. She looked at her the way no one ever had, as if she saw the woman beneath the title and wanted her more. When they finally broke for air, Marin was breathless, eyes wide. That's dangerous, she murmured. Sable's mouth curved. So are you. They sat along the rooftop's edge, shoulders brushing, legs swinging into the dark. Marin told her things she'd never spoken aloud about: her mother's death, the boardroom battles, how success made her lonelier instead of proud. Sable listened the way no one else did. No interruptions, no fixes, no fear. No one looks at me like that, Marin said quietly. Like what? Sable asked. Like I'm not broken. Sable paused, then said, softer, you're not broken. You're just tired of pretending you're not. Marin exhaled, ribs aching around a heart suddenly unarmored. In that instant, she knew she didn't want to let Sable go. Not now, not ever. By morning, Marin was back in her corner office. The skyline burning behind glass and 1,000 unread emails glowing red. None of it mattered: the investors, the projections, the new intern calling her ma'am like she might crack. Only Sable's voice echoed. You're not broken. You're just tired of pretending you're not. No one had ever touched her like that, not only the kiss, but the way Sable reached in without tearing her apart. Terrifying. Addictive. At 10:47 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from a number she hadn't saved but knew by heart. Marin, I want to see you. No rooftop this time. Somewhere real tonight. Marin stared at the words. Somewhere real. She didn't do real. She did controlled. Still, her fingers moved. Send the address. I'll be there at exactly 8 p.m. That evening she stood before a tiny restaurant tucked between two laundromats on a side street. She hadn't walked since college. No valet, no wine list, no white tablecloths. Inside, Sable waited in a booth, two beers and a basket of fries between them. She looked up and smiled like Marin had just saved her life. You came. Don't act surprised. I'm not. I'm impressed. Marin slid into the booth, still in her blazer, her heels feeling embarrassingly out of place on the sticky floor. Sable handed her a beer. You ever been on a date that didn't require a reservation? Is that what this is, a date? Sable tilted her head. What would you call it? Marin hesitated. A mistake. Then I hope you keep making it. They ate, talked, laughed. Sable made her feel like herself. No mask, no performance, just Marin, the woman under the armor. She even laughed. Not the polite kind she gave to clients. A real one, the kind that felt like freedom. Sable leaned back, sipping her beer. Tell me something true. Why? Because you're always performing. I want the version you keep locked behind your eyes. Marin stared at her. She didn't do this. She didn't open doors people could walk through. But Sable was already inside anyway. Fine, she said. When I was 8, I wanted to be a pianist. Not a CEO, not a leader. Just someone who made beautiful things and didn't have to talk to anyone. Sable blinked. That's beautiful. Why didn't you? My father said music was a hobby, not a future. And you listened to him? Marin smirked bitterly. When you're a kid, you listen to the voice that pays the bills. And now I'm the voice that pays the bills. And you're miserable. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Marin looked down, fingers curled around the bottle label. Your turn. Something true. Sable flinch. I hate being touched when I'm angry. I vanish for days when I'm scared. And I always know when someone's lying to me. Marin glanced up sharply. Am I lying to you? Sable's gaze was unreadable. No, but you're lying to yourself. They sat in silence, the air between them thick with all the things neither of them had the words to say yet. Then Sable reached out, her fingers brushing Marin's hand. Come with me where? Somewhere that doesn't belong to either of us. They ended up at a rundown jazz bar tucked inside a forgotten hotel lobby. The music was low, sultry. The room smelled like leather and time. Sable pulled Marin into a booth at the back where the lights were low, and the sound wrapped around them like velvet. This place is old, Marin whispered. Like haunted. That's why I like it. Ghosts don't ask questions. You always talk in riddles. Only when I'm nervous. Marin smiled. You're nervous. Terrified of me. Of how badly I want to know you. They didn't kiss. Not that night. But the intimacy was worse somehow. Sable's hand on Marin's thigh, her eyes studying her like scripture. It wasn't physical. It was emotional stripping. And able to happen. She let herself be unraveled by bit, word by word, breath by breath. She told Sable about the panic attacks she hid behind closed doors. About the therapy she quit after 2 sessions because being vulnerable felt like weakness. Sable listened, not with pity, but with presence. Like she could hold Marin's broken pieces without trying to glue them back. Marin didn't remember falling asleep. But when she woke up hours later in Sable's arms, shoes kicked off, jacket draped over her shoulders, and Sable's fingers stroking her hair, she realized something that made her blood go cold. She didn't want Sable to be temporary, and that was terrifying because Marin had never been someone's forever. And Sable felt like the kind of person you don't get to keep. You just get lucky enough to meet. Marin hadn't been touched in weeks. Not like that. Not without expectation, not with reverence, and it stayed with her. The feeling of Sable's fingers drifting lazily through her hair, as if Marin's thoughts were something sacred. It was obscene how much she craved it again. But what scared her more was how natural it felt. How easily Sable had slipped into the spaces Marin had spent years barricading. Monday arrived like a slap. The building buzzed with tension. Someone leaked a rumor about a hostile acquisition, and Marin had to pretend not to know where it started. Because she did. She'd started it. A strategic misdirection to distract the board while she pulled strings behind the scenes. It was the kind of manipulation she'd built her empire on. But now, in the middle of it, all she could think about was Sable's voice whispering, "Tell me something true." And Marin couldn't stop asking herself the same. What was true anymore? That she didn't want to go home alone. That she hadn't smiled for real in years until Sable. That the woman who kissed her on the rooftop could undo her with a single look. At 7:13 p.m., Sable texted, "Marin, I'm outside." Marin didn't question it. Didn't even reply. She just grabbed her coat and walked out, heart banging against her ribs. Sable was waiting on the sidewalk, leaned against a black motorcycle. Like some kind of cinematic threat to Marin's carefully constructed world. "You ride?" Sable asked, holding out a helmet. "No," Marin said, "but I like watching you pretend I'm the kind of woman who would." "You are?" Sable said simply. Marin took the helmet. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere no one calls you, ma'am." They drove through the city fast, reckless. Sable's body solid between her and the wind. Marin closed her eyes, leaned in, and let go. She didn't care where they were going. She just wanted to be wherever Sable was. They ended up in a converted warehouse turned art gallery, minimalist, dimly lit, filled with abstract canvases that looked like emotion had exploded onto the walls. Sable walked beside her, fingers brushing Marin's occasionally. Not pushing, just close enough to burn. "I come here when I need to feel something," Sable said. "Does it work?" "Sometimes." Marin paused in front of a painting all in red. It was rage and longing, and surrender, smeared in wide, violent strokes. "I feel like this," she whispered. Sable stepped behind her, voice low in her ear. "All the time." Marin nodded and no one sees it. Sable didn't touch her, just stood there, her presence steady and quiet. "I do." Later, they ended up back at Sable's place for the first time. A loft that was somehow chaotic and warm with old vinyl records scattered like memories, and half-filled notebooks on every surface. "You live like a poet," Marin said. I live like someone who's not afraid of mess, Sable corrected. You don't strike me as messy only on the inside. They sat on the couch, music low, light spilling over their faces in gold. Marin studied Sable's profile. The scar on her jaw, the shadow in her eyes. You're hiding something, she said. Sable deny it. So are you. Mine could destroy everything. Sable met her gaze. Then maybe it's time to burn it down. The silence between them shifted. Not empty, charged. Marin leaned in and Sable met her halfway again. The kiss this time was different. Hungrier, heavier, like they'd been holding it back too long. Sable pulled her into her lap, hands firm on Marin's hips, and Marin let herself be consumed. She didn't want slow. She wanted to feel something real enough to shake her apart. Sable gave her exactly that. And then, as they lay tangled in breath and skin and heat, Marin whispered something she hadn't meant to say. I want this. I want you. Sable smiled. Her voice was careful when she answered. You have no idea who I am, do you? Marin froze. What? Sable sat up, suddenly distant. Never mind. No. Say it. It's nothing. Marin felt the shift like a storm gathering. She reached for Sable's hand. Why are you really here? Sable's jaw clenched. Because I didn't expect to fall for the woman trying to take over my company. Marin's blood went cold. What did you say? But Sable was already on her feet, grabbing her jacket, avoiding her eyes. Forget I said anything. Sable, I shouldn't have let it go this far. Marin stood, heart hammering. Who are you? Sable turned at the door, eyes suddenly tired. Someone who is about to become a problem for you. And then she was gone. Marin stood in Sable's apartment alone, heart splitting, mind racing. And for the first time in years, she was afraid, not of losing control, but of losing someone who made her want it. Marin didn't leave Sable's apartment for almost an hour. She sat motionless on the edge of the couch, her blouse still half-buttoned, the taste of Sable still on her lips, and her mind spinning like a machine that had suddenly been turned inside out. The woman trying to take over my company. Sable's words looped over and over in her head, sharper than any boardroom betrayal. Marin was used to liars, manipulators, opportunists. But Sable had been different. Sable had made her feel like a woman again, not a weapon, not a title, not a target. And now Marin wasn't sure which part had been real and which part had been a game. The next morning, she locked herself in her office and demanded a full audit of shareholder activity from the past 6 months. She didn't explain. She didn't breathe. She just read page after page, file after file until a name appeared that made her heart crack in half. Caro, silent partner, majority investor, acquired controlling interest in Caldwell Tech through a blind trust 6 months ago. And she knew it then, not just suspected, knew. Sable Caro. Marin laughed, a dry, sharp sound that felt like breaking glass. She'd kissed the woman who could destroy her career. She'd bare her soul to the one person in the world who had the legal power to vote her out of the company she built from blood and bone. And she had no one to blame but herself. That night, Marin didn't answer Sable's texts. There were 2 of them. The first said, I'm sorry. The second said, please let me explain. But Marin didn't want explanations. She wanted to forget how Sable had touched her like she was precious. How Sable had said, I see you, and meant it. How she had made Marin believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone anymore. And now it was all a lie. Or was it? That question haunted her more than the betrayal itself. Had it been a setup from the start? Or had Sable really not known who she was that night in the elevator? Marin didn't know which answer would hurt more. On Thursday, Sable came to the building. She bypassed security like she owned the place because technically she did. She didn't wear the cap this time. No pretense, no janitor's uniform, just tailored black slacks, a crisp shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a face unreadable as stone. Marin watched her through the glass wall of her office, stomach twisting. Sable didn't knock. She just waited. Marin didn't move, didn't flinch. But the moment their eyes met, something shifted. Sable's face softened. So did Marin's resolve. She opened the door. 5 minutes, Marin said. That's all you get. Sable stepped inside. She didn't sit, didn't look round. Her eyes never left Marin's. I didn't know who you were when I pulled you out of that elevator. Marin folded her arms. Convenient. I didn't. I was there for something else. A walkthrough. I saw the alert and came to help. And then you decided to seduce the CEO. I didn't know you were the CEO until the night you kissed me. Marin blinked. What? I looked you up after. I panicked. I wanted to disappear. But I didn't want to lose you. Marin hated how much that hurt. So what, Sable? You kept playing me? I wasn't playing. I was falling. The silence was brutal. Sable took a breath. I didn't invest in Caldwell to take you down. I believed in what you built. You were always the legend behind the curtain. I wanted to help you take it further. By lying to me. By not walking away when I realized I cared too much. His hands trembled. You don't get to do this. You don't get to make me feel everything. Tear it all down, and then act like the victim. I'm not the victim. I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Marin didn't move. Couldn't breathe. Sable stepped closer. Tell me it meant nothing to you. Look me in the eye and say you felt nothing and I'll leave. Marin opened her mouth. Closed it. She hated her own silence more than anything because the truth was she couldn't say it. She had felt everything, and that terrified her. Sable's voice cracked. I never lied about how I feel. I might have made mistakes, but I never faked this. Then she was gone again, and this time Marin let her go. Not because she didn't care, but because caring had never felt so much like drowning. That night, Marin stood alone on the rooftop. The same one where Sable had kissed her under the stars. The wind was colder now, the city noisier, and the silence inside her, deafening. Marin's days became noise and static. Her inbox overflowed, her calendar suffocated her, and the board was on edge about new leadership shifts. All symptoms of a company on the brink of becoming unrecognizable. She answered every question, solved every problem, delivered every strategy. And still none of it mattered. Not since Sable. Sable had touched a part of her Marin had kept hidden so long she forgot it could feel. And now that part was awake and starving. But Marin had built her world on precision. Control walls. Sable had slipped past all of that like sunlight through cracks. And now she was gone again. It had been 11 days. Not that Marin was counting. Except she was. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten properly, and every time she walked past the rooftop stairwell, her chest had like a bruise that wouldn't heal. On the 12th day, a delivery arrived at Marin's office. No sender, just a small leather-bound notebook. She opened it slowly. Inside were pages filled with Sable's handwriting, messy, emotional, unfiltered. The first line hit her like a gut punch. If I tell you everything, will you still walk away? Each page after that was a storm. Notes Sable had written but never sent. Fragments of thoughts from the day they met. Rage, guilt, hope, stories from Sable's childhood, doubts, dreams, raw honesty. Marin read every word in silence and then read them again and then again. By the time she reached the last page, her hands were shaking. The final line was scrolled like Sable had written it in a rush. You said if we ever met again, you'd marry me. I think I still want that, even if it ruins everything. That night, Marin didn't go home. She drove. No destination, just movement. Her heart pulled her somewhere she didn't want to admit out loud. Sable had once told her about a cabin 2 hours outside the city, secluded, where she went to disappear. Marin had remembered even when she pretended not to. She arrived after midnight. No lights, just trees and silence. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again. The door opened. Sable stood there barefoot in an old hoodie and jeans, eyes bloodshot like she hadn't slept either. She didn't look surprised to see Marin. Just tired, just exposed, just human. I wasn't sure you'd come, Sable said softly. I wasn't sure I would, Marin replied. They stood there suspended between apology and ache. Sable stepped aside. Come in. The cabin was dim, warm, cluttered with books and blankets and quiet things. Marin didn't sit, didn't speak, just stood by the fire, arms folded like she was holding herself together. You lied to me, she said finally. Sable nodded. I did. You infiltrated my life, my company, my walls. I know, and I hate you for it. Sable looked at her, jaw tight. Okay. Marin's voice cracked. But I hate myself more for needing you anyway. Silence. Long heavy. Sable stepped closer cautiously like Marin might vanish. Then let me fix it. You can't. Then let me try. Marin's mask broke. You don't get to love me in silence, Sable. You don't get to say all the right things in notebooks and then disappear every time it gets hard. I didn't know how to stay then learn. Sable's breath hitched. I was terrified. So was I, but I didn't run. I never ran from you. I ran from what you mean to me. Marin's voice dropped to a whisper. What do I mean? Sable stepped closer. Only inches away now. Everything. Marin blinked, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself break. Let the anger crack into pain. Let the pain fall into longing. Sable cubed her face like it was something fragile. And then they kissed. Not hungry, not desperate, but like they were finally letting themselves breathe again. They sank into the couch, arms tangled, hearts thudding. Every touch said, I missed you. I'm sorry. I still want this. When they finally pulled away, Marin rested her forehead against Sable's. This doesn't fix everything. I know. There's still so much you're not telling me. Then asked. Marin hesitated. Why Caldwell? Why me? Sable exhaled. Because it wasn't about the company. It never was. I didn't want your empire. I wanted you, but I didn't know how to want both. Marin searched her eyes. And now Sable held her gaze. Now I want to try. No secrets, no power plays, just us. Marin didn't respond right away, but her silence wasn't distance this time. It was surrender because she wanted that too. Even if it meant risking everything. They stayed in the cabin for 2 days. No phones, no press releases, no board meetings, just warmth, food cooked badly over a gas stove, and the occasional silence that was no longer terrifying, just sacred. Sable slept like she hadn't slept in months. Arms always wrapped around Marin like her body remembered what her mind still feared to claim. Marin let herself feel something like peace, but only in fragments. She had never been good at stillness, and now that the world had paused around her, all her doubts had room to breathe. She watched Sable from the porch one morning, barefoot and half awake, coffee mug in hand, squinting into the woods like she didn't own most of the skyline back in the city. It was beautiful. It was fragile. It wouldn't last. Marin knew the world they'd escaped would come crashing back in. It was just a matter of when. They left the cabin late on Sunday. No words, no promises, just hands held tight during the drive. As if that alone could stop reality from creeping back in. On Monday, Marin walked into her office like she hadn't been gone. Like she hadn't been in the arms of the woman who technically held the power to destroy her. Her assistant didn't mention her absence, but there were whispers in the hall. The board had met in her absence. There had been votes, questions, movement. Sable had promised transparency, but the board didn't wait for transparency. They smelled blood and they were circling. Marin spent the next 3 days putting out fires, negotiating blind. She had no idea where Sable stood now, publicly, politically. And every time she looked at her phone, the silence between them stretched wider. That Wednesday, Sable texted, Marin, we need to talk. Somewhere neutral, somewhere quiet. They met at a private lounge in the lower part of the city. Dark walls, expensive whiskey. The kind of place where secrets were currency, and no one asked for receipts. Marin arrived first. Sable walked in 10 minutes later, her expression unreadable. She didn't kiss her, didn't reach for her hand. She just sat across from her and folded her hands like she was back in a war room. The board wants to force a vote, Sable said. His spine went rigid. On what? Your position. Silence. Then are you pushing it? Sable looked her dead in the eyes. No. But they think I am. And they'll move with or without me. You owe majority. Which means I can stop them or let them take you apart. Marin breathed through her nose. And which one are you going to do? Sable didn't answer. Not immediately. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed razor sharp. That depends on what you want from me, Marin. Because I can protect you from them. But I can't protect you from me. Marin clenched her fists beneath the table. You think I need protection? I think you need to decide if you're in love with me or just in love with the way I made you feel. When the world disappeared, that hit too hard. Marin looked away. Sable continued quieter now. I'm not asking for power. I'm asking for clarity, because if I fight for you in that room and you leave me anyway, I lose everything. Marin's throat closed. I don't want to lose you. Then say that I don't know how. Sable stood. Then learn fast or they'll take it from both of us. She left without waiting for a response. And Marin once again was left with silence and too many choices. That night, Marin sat in her office long after everyone had gone home. She thought about her father, the empire he'd tried to build on her back. She thought about every man who told her she was too cold, too sharp, too ambitious to be loved. She thought about Sable, messy, maddening Sable, who had held her like she was worth saving. And then she made a decision. She called a private meeting. No press, no board members, just Sable. The next morning, Sable entered the room in black. Her eyes weary, her guard already half up. Marin didn't wait. You're right, she said, about everything. I don't know how to love someone like you. Sable's jaw clenched. Then don't make promises you can't. But I want to. Sable blinked. Marin stepped closer. I want to fight for this for you. I just don't know how to do it without breaking everything I've spent my life building. Then break it. Marin laughed softly. Of course you'd say that because it's not love if it only works in secret. Sable took her hand and for once Marin didn't pull away. I'll back you in the vote, Sable said. I'll speak for you. You do that for me. No, Sable said, brushing her thumb over Marin's wrist. I do it because I believe in you. The CEO, the woman, all of it. Marin let herself fall forward, forehead resting against Sable. Then maybe we burn the rule book together. Sable smiled, small and dangerous. Now that's a merger I can get behind. Marin kissed her quick, desperate, certain. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't afraid of losing control anymore. She was afraid of losing Sable. The boardroom was glass and steel and silence. The kind of silence that usually preceded a corporate massacre. Marin sat at the head of the long table, back straight, expression calm. Every inch of her composed like war paint. Her tailored black suit fit her like armor. Her gaze didn't flicker, but her hands, hidden beneath the table, trembled. Sable hadn't arrived yet. She wasn't late, but Marin's chest wouldn't loosen until she saw her. Every member of the board was present. 12 of them. Old blood, cold ambition, and eyes that had never truly seen her as anything but an anomaly. A woman too powerful for comfort. We're here to vote, said Bram Ashcroft, the acting chairman, voice smug. Effective leadership in light of recent concerning moves by our current CEO. Marin didn't blink. Define concerning your recent disappearances. Your silence during critical restructuring talks. The perception that you're compromised by a personal relationship with our largest investor. That last part hit like a slap, but Marin let it slide off her skin like water. Perception, she said, is not reality, but it is dangerous. Another board member added, if our shareholders lose confidence, they'll take their money elsewhere. Then maybe we need shareholders who believe in vision, not gossip. We need stability, Marin. No, came a voice from the doorway. You need truth. Sable entered like a storm in a silk shirt, confident, composed, radiating threat with every step. She didn't look at Marin, not yet. She walked straight to the table and pulled out a chair. The room shifted. You could feel it, the discomfort, the recalculations. Miss Caro, Ashcroft said, you were not invited to speak. Then you shouldn't have made this public. Sable said flatly, if you want to vote someone out, at least have the spine to do it without pretending it's about ethics. Marin's pulse kicked hard. She hadn't known Sable would come in like this. Hadn't known she would fight this visibly, this dangerously. You have no right, Ashcroft began, but Sable cut him off. I have every right. I own 51% of this company and I'm casting my vote now. Marin Fox remained CEO. Effective immediately, no conditions. Silence pressed in on all sides. Marin's throat went tight. When Sable finally met her eyes, it was there in yielding, unmistakable loyalty. Not just to the company, to her. You can't override the vote, a board member protested, grasping at procedure. We have bylaws, Sable replied, steady as steel, and I've read every line. I'm not here as a lover. I'm here as a shareholder. She tipped her chin. Marin stays. You're destroying this company for her. Someone spat. Sable leaned in, voice low enough to cut. No. I'm saving it from people who forgot that risk is the price of vision. Another director tried to quibble over legality. A different one pivoted to Marin's personal life. None of it mattered. Sable had stepped in as shield and sword, and the momentum shifted. What followed was a blur: points of order, motions, votes, withdrawals. Marin watched as if underwater, heart pounding hard enough to bruise her ribs. She was still CEO, still at the helm, and yet everything felt irrevocably altered. When the room finally emptied, Sable didn't move. Marin crossed to her, slow and deliberate. You just lit half the bridge network on fire for me. I'd do it again. You just made enemies out of half this board. Then let them come. Sable's eyes held. This is where they tried to kill you. Good, she added, almost calm. Let them aim for me. You've had enough knives in your back. Marin almost laughed. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. You didn't have to save me. I did, Sable said simply. Because I love you, and I won't apologize for it. The words cracked something deep inside Marin. Say it again. Sable's hands framed her face. I love you. Marin kissed her like breath, like defiance, like she'd finally decided she didn't care who saw. When they separated, Sable whispered, let's build something they can't tear down. Marin's smile was answer enough. Together, they walked out hand in hand. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, they were on the same side. 3 days later, the battlefield had only widened. The press circled like sharks scenting blood. Anonymous leaks flooded the feeds, rumors of misconduct, insinuations of favoritism, whispers about a fractured board, questions about Sable Caro's ethics and Marin Fox's leadership. The public didn't want facts. They wanted spectacle. And now they had it. Sable's name was everywhere, not just as an investor, but as Marin's lover. Headlines sneered. Sleeping with power. Caldwell corpse. Scandal in silk. CEO or puppet? They could pretend not to see it, could bury themselves in strategy decks and crisis calls. But the noise kept coming, relentless as weather. And still, under the roar, one clear truth held. They'd chosen each other. And choosing, they'd made themselves the story until they could rewrite it as the future. Who's really running Caldwell now? Marin read them all. She didn't flinch anymore. She was used to being villainized. But Sable wasn't. Sable had spent her life in shadows, in silence, pulling strings and avoiding spotlights. And now the world was tearing her apart. Marin found her in the apartment one night. Lights off. Bottle half empty, fingers stained with ink from a letter she never finished. Sable looked up, eyes exhausted. They're calling me a fraud, a predator. You're neither. They think I bought you. They don't know me. Sable scoffed. They don't care. They just want to watch us bleed. Marin sat beside her, then let them watch. But they'll never see the truth, which is that I would have burned it all down for you long before you walked into that elevator. Sable's laugh was bitter. I'm not used to being seen like this. Welcome to my world. Sable turned her face into Marin's shoulder, and for the first time, Marin felt how fragile she really was. The woman who had defied the board, defied the press, who had said, I love you, like a declaration of war. She was unraveling under the weight of being visible. They want to break us, Sable whispered. Then we give them nothing to break. But it wasn't that simple. The whispers grew louder. Clients pulled out of deals. Stock dipped internally. Loyalties wavered. Some board members started building coalitions behind the scenes. Marin felt the empire she built start to shift beneath her like sand. And worse, she felt Sable pulling back. Slowly, quietly, Sable still touched her, still kissed her, still curled around her in the night. But something in her eyes had changed. Not love, but fear. One night, Marin awoke to find the bed empty. She found Sable on the balcony, barefoot, arms crossed, looking out over the city like she was already gone. Tell me you're not planning to disappear, Marin said. Sable turned around. I'm not good at being the reason someone loses everything. You're not the reason, Marin. Sable's voice cracked. You're bleeding for me. I can't keep watching that. Marin stepped forward, fury and panic in her voice. Don't you dare start protecting me. Don't you dare decide for me what I can survive. I don't know how to be loved like this. Then learn. A long silence. Then Sable finally turned. What if this ends us? Marin stared at her. Then at least we went down together. Sable stepped forward. But this time it wasn't a kiss. It was a slow, desperate embrace, her forehead against Marin's neck, her body trembling. I love you so much it hurts, Sable whispered. Then stop trying to survive me. Choose me. I do every day. That's what terrifies me. Marin held her tighter. Then let's be terrified together. The next morning, Sable released a statement to the press. A direct message. No PR filter, no corporate polish, just her voice. She admitted everything. Her role, her relationship, her vote. But she framed it as what it was, an act of trust. Not manipulation. It was bold, honest, and dangerous. The fallout was immediate. Some applauded her transparency. Others called for Marin's resignation again. But there was something new now. Respect. The kind that comes when someone stops pretending. Sable had stepped out of the shadows for Marin. And Marin? Marin held the line. The company bent, but didn't break. At least not yet. Late that night, as they lay tangled in silence, Marin whispered into Sable's shoulder. Power is the most fragile kind of love. Sable didn't answer. She just held her tighter because she knew it, too. And they were both holding something that could shatter if either one let go. 3 weeks passed. The world didn't calm down, but Marin and Sable learned how to breathe in its chaos. The initial storm of the scandal lost its novelty. News stories took its place. Politicians, celebrity divorces, and oil spill. Sable's public statement had shifted the narrative, not ended it, but changed the tone. She had looked the world in the eye and said, yes, I love her. No, I won't apologize. And people respected that, even the ones who still didn't like it. But respect didn't equal forgiveness. And it definitely didn't equal safety. Inside Caldwell Tech, the wounds still bled behind closed doors. Some clients refused to come back. Some internal partners treated Marin like a ticking bomb, smiling to her face, moving against her in quiet corners. And though Sable had promised to fight beside her, there were moments Marin caught her slipping into old habits again, disappearing into silence, vanishing into work, avoiding touch like it burned. It wasn't rejection. It was fear. And Marin understood that better than anyone. One night, she found Sable still in her office at 3 a.m., eyes red from staring at numbers and damage control reports. Sable didn't even look up when Marin walked in. "If you're here to convince me we're still winning," Sable muttered. "Save your breath." Marin didn't say anything. She simply walked over, shut Sable's laptop, and pulled her into her arms. Sable resisted for half a second, then broke. Her body melted into Marin's, and her hands clung to the back of her shirt like she was afraid Marin would dissolve. "I don't know how to fix this," Sable whispered. "Then stop trying to fix it. Just stay." Sable pulled back, searched her face. "You still trust me?" His eyes didn't flinch with everything. The next morning, Sable didn't go to work. She didn't disappear either. She sent Marin one text. "There's something I want to show you." Marin found her waiting outside a building downtown, run down, forgotten, but familiar. It had once been a homeless shelter. Sable's mother used to work there before she died. Marin remembered Sable mentioning it once back when they were still trading truths on rooftops. Inside, Sable showed her plans, blueprints, investment drafts, architects already on hold. "I'm buying this place back," Sable said. "Not through Caldwell. Not with shareholder money, with mine. I want to rebuild it. I want something in this city that doesn't exist just to make someone rich." Marin stared at her. "Why now?" "Because I've spent my entire life making things that profit from fear. I want to build something that exists out of love." Marin stepped forward. "And you want me to help?" "No," Sable said, voice soft. "I want you to believe I'm not just the woman who nearly ruined you." Marin reached out, took her hand. "You never ruined me. You reminded me what I was building for." That night, they went back to Sable's apartment, though it already felt like theirs. The lights were low, the city humming below them. Marin stood in front of the mirror, removing her earrings one by one. When Sable came up behind her and kissed her shoulder like it was sacred, "I thought I lost you," Sable whispered. Marin turned slowly. "You didn't. You almost did. And I'm still here." Sable's hands found her waist. "If this fails, this company, this us, I wanted to be because we tried, not because we were afraid to." Marin nodded, her voice thick. "Then let's try harder." And they did. For the next 2 weeks, they fought together, strategized together, walked into meetings as a united front. They didn't hide. They didn't flinch. And slowly, something began to shift. The company started stabilizing. Partnerships reopened. A major client, one Marin had long believed lost, signed back on after a private call from Sable. She said the way you look at me convinced her the company still had a soul. Sable admitted with a soft smile. "I told her you were the one with the soul," Marin replied. But even as things recovered, Marin could feel the tension under the surface. Not between them, but around them. The board wasn't done. Not truly. They had been silenced, not defeated. A received an anonymous tip. A leak was being prepared. Something big. Something old. Her past. "They're digging," she told Sable. "Then let them dig. You don't understand. There's something in there." Sable stepped closer. "Marin, whatever it is you tell me now, I'd rather face it beside you than read it in a headline." Marin swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "When I first took control of Caldwell, I made a deal I've never spoken about. Illegal, risky. I saved the company, but if it comes out, I lose everything." Sable didn't move, didn't blink. "Then we face it." "Sable, no more secrets. No more shields. It could take you down, too." Sable stepped forward. "Then we fall together." And just like that, Marin realized that the only thing more dangerous than power was trusting someone enough to share it. The leak dropped on a Thursday morning. No warning, no chance to get ahead of it. 1 second, Marin was sipping her coffee, staring out the panoramic window of her office. The next, her phone was vibrating nonstop. Emails, alerts, texts. A headline blinked on her screen like a knife against her throat. "Caldwell Tech built on fraud." CEO Marin Fox accused of financial misconduct in early years. It was real. The deal she'd buried, the one she never thought would resurface. It was out. The article was surgical, precise. It detailed how in her first year of leadership, Marin had made a secret off-the-books arrangement with a now-defunct international supplier to keep Caldwell afloat during the 2009 crash. Technically illegal, morally gray, a desperate move, and a mistake. Marin stood in the center of her office, heart pounding. While outside, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. She didn't panic, not visibly. She just picked up her phone, called Sable, and said, "They know." Sable didn't ask what. She simply said, "I'm coming." By the time Sable arrived, the vultures had landed. The board had called an emergency meeting. Press vans lined the street outside the building. Caldwell Tech legal department was scrambling. Marin stepped into the boardroom like a soldier heading for the front lines, and Sable walked beside her. No hesitation, no distance, just presence. The board members were livid. Bram Ashcroft slammed his file onto the table. "You lied to us. You covered up a criminal act. You put this entire company at risk." Marin didn't defend herself. She looked each one of them in the eye and said, "Yes, I did." Gasps. Outrage. "I did what I had to do to save this company. At 28, I was handed a sinking ship with no lifeboats. I made a choice. I didn't do it for greed. I did it because I believed in what Caldwell could become. And because of that choice, we survived." "That's not the point," another board member snapped. "You committed fraud. I took a risk and I've carried the weight of that risk every day since. But don't stand there and pretend you haven't profited from it. You all did. You could be indicted." Marin didn't flinch. "Then I'll face it. But I won't let this company fall just because I didn't get to play the game the way you wanted me to." Someone said they should call a vote of no confidence. Sable finally stood. Her voice was quiet, lethal. "If you vote her out now, you're not just removing a CEO. You're killing the future of this company. The world doesn't need perfect leaders. It needs honest ones. You want to bury her? Fine. But you bury me with her because I'm not going anywhere." Silence. And then Ashcroft said, "You love her. That clouds your judgment." Sable smiled cold and clear. "No, that sharpens it." The vote didn't happen. Not that day. The board recessed in chaos. The legal team started damage control, and Marin walked out of the building with Sable's hand in hers. The world watching, the future dangling by a single thread. That night, Marin didn't go home. She couldn't. The weight of it all settled on her chest like iron. She stood on Sable's balcony, eyes on the skyline, voice hollow. "It's all going to fall." Sable stood behind her, arms circling her waist. "Then we rebuild it brick by brick. This time with the truth. I don't deserve you. You deserve a chance to be forgiven, even by yourself." Marin turned, eyes glossy. "What if I don't survive this? Then we fall together." "We've already said that. But I thought I could carry it all. That if I just worked hard enough, buried deep enough, I could keep it clean." Sable touched her face. "What you buried still bleeds. Let it bleed. Let it hurt. But don't hide from it anymore." Marin closed her eyes. "I'm so tired." "Then rest. I'll carry it for a while." She let Sable hold her, and for the first time, she didn't resist the comfort. She didn't push it away. She let herself break. And Sable held every shard. The next day, Marin went public. She stood in front of the press, told the truth. No spin, no denial. She confessed the deal, explained the context, took full responsibility. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm asking for accountability for myself and for every person who's ever had to choose survival over protocol." The backlash was loud, but the support was louder. Employees spoke up. Old partners defended her. Clients who had walked away returned with cautious but open hands. Marin Fox had told the truth, and in doing so, She proved she wasn't just a CEO. She was human, and more than anything, she was still standing. That night, as the company held its breath, and the world waited for the dust to settle, Marin walked into Sable's arms and whispered, "I'm still here." And Sable said, "I always knew you would be." Marin had never been a symbol before. She had been power, precision, fear, but not hope, not vulnerability. And now that the world had seen her cracks, some wanted to destroy her completely, while others wanted to lift her higher than ever. That duality was dizzying. The board didn't try to remove her again. They couldn't. Not after the public rallied behind her post-confession. Not after the numbers studied and the shareholders ironically saw that the transparency had actually improved trust in Caldwell. But power doesn't forget humiliation, especially when delivered by two women in love. Marin felt it in every meeting now, in the side glances, in the carefully veiled tones. They didn't challenge her authority, not directly, but they resented her survival. And they resented Sable even more. The whispers shifted focus. Now, it wasn't about Marin's mistakes. It was about Sable's presence. Too involved, too powerful, too close to the crown. Marin knew the language of coups. This wasn't about scandal anymore. This was about territory. One morning, Marin arrived to find her name omitted from an internal memorandum she should have authored. A pitch she green-lit rerouted through another executive. A meeting rescheduled 3 times without notice. Subtle moves, dangerous ones. She brought it to Sable, who sat across from her at the kitchen table, fingers laced, quiet. "They're isolating me," Marin said. "They're trying to prove I've lost control." Sable didn't look surprised. "They can't win outright, so they're going to make it so painful that you'll resign yourself. And it's working. Then fire them." Marin blinked. "Excuse me? Fire the one still playing both sides. Clean house." Marin shook her head. "That's a PR nightmare. So is being pushed out of your own empire one silent vote at a time." Marin exhaled, rubbed her temples. "You make it sound simple." "It is brutal, but simple." She looked up at Sable. Really looked. "You're used to fighting dirty. I'm used to surviving. And I'm tired of surviving." Sable reached across the table, took her hand. "Then let's build. Marin. Not just survive. Let's build something that's actually ours." It was the first time Sable had said it like that. Ours. Not just the company, the life, the future. But Marin's mind couldn't stop spinning. "You'd really go through that kind of war with me." "I already am. And what if I can't win? Then we make losing beautiful." Marin stood pacing. "You've sacrificed so much for me already. Your reputation, your privacy. You gave up the peace you lived in. I gave that up the night I pulled you out of the elevator." Marin froze, their eyes locked. "You still remember that night?" "I replay it more than I should. You were a stranger. You were everything." The words didn't break Marin. They studied her. She walked over, touched Sable's jaw, and kissed her like it might be the last time. "Then let's end this on our terms." That same day, Marin called an emergency executive meeting, not with the board, just the senior leadership team. She didn't wear black. She didn't bring legal counsel. She wore white, clean, calm, and she told the truth again. "Some of you have stopped believing in me. Some of you are playing a waiting game. But here's the thing. I'm not leaving. I built this place not for control, for vision. And I won't let it be strangled by fear. So if you want out, I'll buy you out. No shame, no lawsuits. You walk today." Silence. Then one by one 4 executives stood, walked out. Doors closed behind them like final chapters, and Marin remained unshaken. The next few days were brutal. Rebuilding the leadership team, dealing with leaks again, reassuring clients. But something in her changed. She stopped waiting for everything to fall apart and started deciding who she wanted to become. That weekend, Sable drove her out of the city just 2 hours, to a hidden lake house she'd owned for years, and never shared with anyone. "I bought it after my mother died," Sable said quietly. It was meant to be a place to disappear. You don't disappear, Marin murmured. I do, Sable replied. Just not from you. They stayed tonight's. No phones. No email. Just skin and firelight, real laughter, and a silence that soothed instead of stalking them. On the final evening, Marin lounged with her legs across Sable's lap, a glass of wine in hand. Voice low. Do you ever wonder what this would have been if we'd met another way? I used to, Sable said, smiling. Now I think it was always going to be you. Elevator, boardroom, battlefield. All roads here. Marin held her gaze. I love you. It wasn't the first time. But it was the first time she didn't say it like a gamble, she said it like a promise. Sable kissed her knuckles. Then let's give them something untouchable. Like what? Like a future. And even wrapped in that stolen calm. They both knew what they wouldn't say aloud. Peace is brief when it's built beside power. Monday struck like a blade. No softness. No warning, just impact. Marin reached the Caldwell Tech building rooftop and walked into a scene she hadn't imagined. Armed security at the executive floor. Unfamiliar uniforms. Her badge dead at the scanner. Her name scrubbed from the system. The face that once branded the company was suddenly a problem to keep out. She didn't startle. Didn't rush. She turned on her heel, returned to the car, and dialed one number. They made their move, she said. I'm already there, Sable answered, voice low and steady. 10 minutes later, a pin dropped to her phone. A rooftop bar downtown. The skyline they'd carved with ambition spread beneath it. Marin arrived to find Sable waiting to tablets. One contract, expression set in stone. They called an emergency vote last night, Sable said without ceremony. They knew we were away. Knew you couldn't block it. They've locked me out of my own company. Trying to strip everything before the annual report hits because they know the numbers finally swing your way. Who led it? A beat. Sable's jaw tensed. Ashcroft. Marin's eyes closed. Not just treachery, intimacy turned venom. They think they've won, Sable went on. But they missed one thing. Which is, I still hold the final vote. They filed the removal but without the majority shareholders sign off. It doesn't stick unless I ratify it. Marin blinked, breath catching on the edge of a war they were suddenly ready to finish. You can still block it. Yes. But if I do, they'll retaliate. Lawsuits, public smear campaigns. They'll take the company down just to ruin us. And if you don't, Sable looked away. They'll oust you quietly. No scandal, just erasure. Marin stared at her. And what happens to you? I'll stay as the one who let it happen. The one who didn't fight for you. The silence between them pulsed with everything they hadn't said in months. Everything they'd buried under survival. Marin reached across the table, took Sable's hand. So, we're here. We're here. If you block them, you risk everything you've built. You make yourself the target. You already are. No, Marin whispered. You've shielded me enough. Let me fall alone this time. Sable's eyes burned. No. If we burn, then let it be together. She slid one of the tablets toward Marin. There's another option. Marin read the document. Blinked. You want to dissolve the board? Yes. You want to go nuclear? No. I want to reset the entire game. Fire every last one of them. Rebuild Caldwell as a private company under us. I've already ranged the capital. That's dangerous. So was falling in love with you. Marin looked up. If we do this, there's no turning back. If we don't, they win. And worse, you disappear. Your name wiped from the thing you built. Is that the legacy you want? Marin closed her eyes. The weight of it all. The legacy, the ambition, the fear, the love pressed down like iron. We do it together. Your name on every page. Not just mine. Done. They both signed. Not with ceremony. Not with hesitation. Just resolve. And when the digital ink dried, the war had officially begun. In the next 48 hours, Sable unleashed hell. A full audit of the board's finances was made public. Private investigations into conflicts of interest surfaced. Shareholder alliances were reshaped. Executives who thought they were untouchable found themselves exposed. And Marin, she held the line. She gave speeches. She stood on stages. She reminded the world who she was, not as a survivor, but as a woman who refused to be erased. The media roared. The internet split. Some called it a power grab. Others called it revolution. Sable stayed 2 steps ahead of the chaos, feeding Marin the right names, the right data, the right moments to strike. It was war, yes, but it was also the most intimate act of love either of them had ever known. To fight for something together, to burn down the house and build it again, brick by brick, scar by scar. And when the final board member resigned in disgrace, Sable didn't celebrate. She just looked at Marin across the city's skyline and said, "You're still here." And Marin, with tears in her eyes and steel in her voice, said, "So are you?" That night they stood in the middle of Marin's office, no longer locked out, no longer afraid. Sable kissed her there against the glass with the city watching like a witness. "Do you know?" Sable whispered. "How many times I imagined this moment." Marin smiled. "Then let's make sure it lasts." "How?" Marin turned to her, eyes glowing. "By letting the world see what it looks like when 2 women don't just survive, they win." Spring came slowly, not in flowers, but in silence. In the quiet after war, in rooms that no longer echoed with threats, only plans. The chaos faded, but the change remained. Caldwell Tech was theirs now, rebuilt, rebranded, reborn. The press called it the most ruthless corporate cleansing in recent memory. The internet called it Sapphic domination. Marin didn't care what they called it. She had Sable. She had control. She had peace. But more than all that, she had truth. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing. Not for her father's ghost. Not for boardroom vultures. Not for anyone. Sable had stripped her of everything that wasn't real. And what remained was terrifying and beautiful. Their days found rhythm. Marin ran the company. Sable shaped the vision. They worked in sync. 2 minds with matching ambition and different wounds. They still fought, still clashed, still challenged each other in every way that mattered. But now the tension was fertile. It grew things. And their nights were church. All skin and whispers and fingers tangled in silk sheets. It wasn't escape anymore. It was home. Then one evening after a long day filled with clients and contracts, and one very annoyed government official, Sable stood in the middle of Marin's office as the sun dropped behind the skyline. She was wearing black, always black, her sleeves rolled, her jaw sharp, and her eyes softer than Marin had ever seen. "You remember the elevator?" Sable asked quietly. Marin looked up from her desk, lips curving. "You mean the one I was trapped in before the janitor, who wasn't a janitor, pulled me out and wrecked my entire life?" Sable smiled. "Yeah, that one. What about it? You said something to me that night. Something you probably don't remember." Marin stood slowly. "I remember everything." Sable stepped closer. "Say it again." Marin blinked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "If we meet again, I'll marry you." "We met again." Sable's voice cracked just slightly. "Over and over. Through fire, through scandal, through everything." Marin reached up, touched her cheek. "And I'd say yes every time." Sable pulled a small black box from her pocket. No flourish, no kneeling, no speech, just an offering. "Then marry me where the world can hear it." Marin's breath caught. Inside the box was a ring like nothing else. Industrial and elegant with a twist of dark steel. And white gold shaped like something salvaged from a storm. "You designed this." A nod. "Every part of it. It's sharp. So are you. It's heavy. So is this love." Marin looked up and her eyes were wet. "Yes. Just that. No performance. No spectacle. Just a woman who had spent her whole life running from being known, and was now ready to be seen." The wedding was 3 months later, Not in a cathedral, not in a mansion, but on the rooftop of Caldwell Tower, the place where Sable had first kissed her in the dark and whispered, "Try me." The world was watching. Cameras, journalists, investors, employees, enemies, all of them. But Maren didn't care. She wore white again. Sable wore black again. Their vows were short, honest, messy. Sable said, "I'll never be easy, but I'll always be real." Maren said, "I don't need easy. I just need you." The kiss was long, bold, a declaration. The city roared below them. Flashbulbs, applause. But the loudest sound was the silence inside their kiss. The silence that said, "We made it." That night, as they lay in bed with the moonlight pouring over their hands, wedding rings warm against skin, Sable whispered, "You're still the only thing I've ever wanted that scared me." Maren smiled against her neck. "Good, because I plan to keep terrifying you. Promise forever." Outside, the city moved on. Corporations shifted. Power changed hands. The world forgot the scandal, the drama, the politics. But some things remained. In Caldwell Tech Building Rooftop, two women sat at the helm of an empire built not just on ambition, but on love that refused to die. They weren't perfect, but they were real. And every time Sable walked into Maren's office, Maren looked up like it was the first time. Every time Maren pulled Sable close at night, Sable held her like a vow. And sometimes when the city was quiet and the skyline burned gold, Sable would lean over and say, "You know, I married the janitor." And Maren would reply, "And I married the woman who owned the building the whole damn time." And they would laugh, and they would kiss, and they would begin again. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.